Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody. Before we get into the issue, I just wanted to let you guys know that this is the free version of the podcast. And all that means is that this is far behind where I'm at in the Patreon version. So if you're liking this and you need more John Constantine, you can't get enough, be sure to go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, which gives you access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've done so far, and a new Hellblazer podcast every week. And you'll also get the exclusives from our main Planes, Trains, and Comic Books podcast. So if any of that interests you, definitely check out our Patreon at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word. And with that, let's get into the issue. Today, we are reading Hellblazer number 18. And just a little recap of what's been going on in the last issues of Hellblazer. John Constantine has made a couple of new friends. They are a group of counterculture travelers that go around in vans and campers and kind of just live off the grid. And they are also into like pagan and earth magics and stuff. So they get along with Constantine pretty well on that side of things. But all is not well with this group. Not only do they have to deal with the government not liking them and society in general kind of thinking they're weirdos and the police attacking them randomly and stuff. Currently, they are fighting against and have been attacked by a corporation named Geotronics, who has figured out how to use the magics of the earth, specifically the ley lines and the way that like stones are arranged in those ley lines. And ley lines are like vortexes of power and earth magic and energy. And so like things like Stonehenge with older civilizations, they knew that if they aligned stones in a certain way, it would kind of like make it a holy place and they could harness the energies and have rituals and stuff there. So this company has figured out that these exist and they are harnessing them for a machine that they can use as a weapon. But in order to run that weapon, they need psychics. And unfortunately for the group of travelers, one of their members, specifically a child named Mercury, was a very powerful psychic, and Geotronics found out, so they kidnapped her. So John, being very angry that they were attacked by this company, gets on his badass clothing and goes on a mission to get Mercury back and take down this company. And while he was taking a train into London to find out where they're keeping Mercury, the train came under attack by a psychic force of fear that was coming from the weapon that Geotronics is making and testing. So John escapes the fear craziness and also the train wreck that happens from that. And that is where we left off. John is pissed. He is headed to find Mercury. And that is where we pick up on this issue. Now, first things first, we got the cover here. We can see a picture of John with his cool sunglasses and his short hair and his black trench coat, and then smoke in the background and stuff because he's always smoking. And then we also see in the background there are words, like if someone's typing a letter. And if you read what the letter says, it very much sounds like a suicide note. And also on the bottom of this cover, you see a razor blade that's got blood dripping from it. So once again, a very non-traditional cover for a comic book, but all of these covers have been kind of mysterious and esoteric. And we see also that this is written by Jamie Delano, and the art is by Mike Buckingham, and the inks are by Alfredo Alcala. And we start off on the first page with a woman who is very, very distraught and is filled with anxiety and fear every day because she has been getting hate mail in the post every day delivered by the postman. So every day at the time that the postman delivers mail, she gets more and more anxious and freaked out because she is worried that she will get another one of these letters. And we also see on this page that this is part 5 of the Fear Machine story arc, and the name of this specific issue is Hate Mail and Love Letters. And as we turn the page, we see that the lady is receiving mail at this exact moment that we're following her, and she is freaking out. And as the postman puts the mail through the slot in her door, she looks, and there is in fact one of these hate letters from someone. So she opens it up and reads it. And in the panel, we can kind of read what it says. I'll read from it. It says, "We warned if you didn't lay off, what would happen to your wife. So one day soon, we're going to get her. Probably on her way back from the doctor's. With razors, I should think. Then every time you see her face, you'll think of us. The force hasn't got room for bleeding hearts like you. Die in agony, arsehole." And it is signed The Laughing Policeman. So we can see that she's going around her house looking at pictures of her husband, who these pieces of mail are actually addressed to. So they're trying to send this message to her husband, but she's actually been protecting him because she doesn't want him to see, all these letters every day. And so she's been harboring this horrible secret inside of her, and she's feeling worse and worse about it to the point where mentally she is about to break. And today is that day. She takes all the letters that she finds and she burns them in the fire that they have. And she goes to the bathroom, finds a bunch of sleeping pills, gets a razor blade, runs herself a bath, and proceeds to slit her wrist and commit suicide. Now, the whole time she's doing these things, we're getting narration from her thoughts about why she's doing this. And basically, it's because she's trying to protect her husband, Jeffrey, who is on the force, obviously. The other policemen that he works with are not happy with him, but we're not sure exactly why. They don't give us here why the other policemen are sending him hate mail and stuff like that. So all we know right now is that she has been very, very mentally affected by these letters and trying to protect her husband, who she loves and doesn't want him to see these horrible things that people are saying about him. So, like I said, she writes "Goodbye, Jeffrey" in blood on the mirror in the bathroom and says, "I'm sorry, I love you." And then we cut to Marge, who is the mother of Mercury, the girl that the corporation has kidnapped. And she's writing a letter to John, trying to get his progress and telling him where they are at, the traveler group and her, because they have gone all the way up to Scotland to try to meet up with this group called the Pagan Nation. And they are, I guess, eco-anarchists, they call themselves. And it's funny because as Marge is describing them, she's like, "John, you wouldn't believe it. Like, we thought we knew what magic was and what it could do." And I guess you could call their group of travelers like dabblers in magic, maybe. They're aware of it. They just don't know how to quite harness it as much as this pagan nation does. And it seems like the way she's talking about it is basically like they are one with the earth, these pagan nation people. And she specifically says, "They seem outside this country, not like me and the rest of the freedom mob. We're jumping off society like fleas from a dying dog. These people are totally apart. They dance to a different drum. They know the earth's their mother, but more than that, they know she's their lover too. There's an energy here, John. I don't know how to describe it except to say it's sexual." So she's learning all about these pagans who are apparently really, really into the earth. So she goes on to say that the previous night she had some kind of religious experience. The moon was full, the night was cold, and everybody was drinking basically. And this woman who was beautiful and free and was dancing by the fire, her name was Zed. And you might recognize that name because this person is Zed, the girl who Constantine freed from the weird Christian cult about 5 issues back. And apparently, since she got free of that, she has come up to Scotland, joined the pagan nation, and got all into earth magic and whatnot. So she's dancing freely in front of everybody, and basically it's turning everybody on. That's the way that Marge says it. She writes, "As she sang and danced like a tree in the wind, a fish leaping, a back flexed in passion. It turned me on, John. It turned everybody on, especially Errol." So Errol is the mixed race fellow who is super nice to John in the traveler camp. And it turns out that Zed and Errol used to be boyfriend and girlfriend. So Zed goes over to Errol after this dance of hers has made everybody all erotically charged and whatnot. And and she grabs Errol and takes him up to like a cliff that's underneath the full moon. And they start doing it. And of course, everybody being free and pagan or whatever, they follow Zed and Errol up there and just watch them have sex. And keep in mind, this is Marge writing a letter to John being like, "This is what happened last night." So she's basically like, "You're missing out on all this cool shit." So she says in the letter, and then she just sort of grabbed Errol and pulled him down. And then they were right at our feet, doing it, loving one another amongst the stars. Then, so was everyone else. It was right. It was the only thing to do. This boy was standing next to me. Couldn't have been more than 16. He just looked at me, and I reached out for him, and the rest was pure lust. And there, in the night, in the cold dew, we dedicated it to the earth, and I'm proud we did." And then she just completely changes subjects and says, "Have you found her yet, John?" Come home quickly. You should both be here. So then we cut to John, who is walking into the hotel he's been staying at in London for the last month. And it's very apparent that the people there don't like him, like the people who own the hotel. But he's paying his bills on time as far as for the room and everything. So they can't really say much about him other than they just are very rude to him and not polite at all. But as he passes the front desk, the guy there says, hey, you got a piece of mail. And that is the letter from Marge that we just read. So he gets up to his room and he reads it. And then he begins to write her back a letter now that he knows where she is and he can send her a post. He can give her updates on what's been going on. So he tells her that he has not found Mercury yet, but that his investigation is starting to move in the right direction. And the main problem or obstacle that is getting in his way of finding the information he needs is that no one will talk to him ever since that story in the newspaper ran about him being a Satanist murderer or whatever. So he says only the hardcore Satanists will talk to him, and none of the other normal people that he would get information from are willing to meet him. He also explains that in order to afford his hotel room, he had to dig out his collection of 19th century Japanese pillow books and sell them. So I don't know what a pillow book is. I'm assuming it's 19th century pornography, basically. So he had to sell those books to a bookstore in order to get $1.50, he says, and it broke his heart because he really liked those pillow books. And he begins to describe the area he's been staying around and how it's pretty seedy and stuff. And he says, so I went to one of these gentlemen's clubs, if you could call it that, here. And it was pretty seedy, but I ran into someone I did not expect to find here. It was a policeman named Jeff Talbot. And I'm actually not sure if we've seen this detective before, but it seems like John knows who he is, so he must have been in a previous storyline as just like a policeman that we saw, but I didn't take note of. And when John sees him, he sees John, and John is kind of apprehensive at first because he's been on the run from the police, he thinks, for the murders of his flat neighbors. But luckily for him, Inspector Talbot lets him know that John is no longer a suspect and that he doesn't need to worry about it. And at first, John is pissed because he's like, well, what about that news story that ran? And Talbot's like, well, I mean, we had to give him something. And they just kind of came in and started taking pictures, and they talked to some of the policemen that were on the scene. And when they got the information that you were into black magic and there looked like there was pagan stuff in the rooms and whatnot, the newspaper just kind of took those details and fabricated their own story about how John was a murderer. So now that John knows that the police aren't after him, he decides, I'm going to get pissed drunk with this guy and kind of see if he can get some information out of him because, the inspector's on the police force, so maybe he knows something about geotronics or missing children or anything going on that would be out of the ordinary or like magic base that he could get a read on. So after getting Inspector Talbot super drunk, John finds out that Talbot has been getting hate mail because he was given the task to investigate some inappropriate police behavior in just a random English, county force. But the problem is he happened to stumble upon a big force-wide cover-up that extended far beyond what they thought as far as corruption goes. And the cover-up just kept going up and up the ladder. And since he is an honest cop, apparently, that's what John calls him, he kept following it, even though he was getting heat from his higher-ups, telling him to drop it and whatnot. He actually found out about a black squad of cops that were going around and kind of on the side. They were working as like a special private force of security and police and cover-up agents for some company. And John kind of puts two and two together and realizes that this was the fake police squad that attacked the Traveler group and him and kidnapped Mercury. And then also they were the people that cleaned up the train incident that happened last issue. And as the evening goes on, the inspector gets more and more drunk to the point that he is almost in tears, kind of telling John about stuff he probably shouldn't tell him about. He says that the force is riddled with Freemasons who had squeezed him out because he wouldn't back off, and about all the hate mail that he had been trying to keep from his wife. And he begins to tell Constantine about his wife as they took a taxi to drop the inspector off at his house. And when they get there, he invites John in for a cup of tea, a nightcap or whatnot. And Inspector Talbot walks into his house and realizes very quickly that the house is very quiet and his wife is not answering him as he calls her name. And as he goes upstairs looking for her, we find out that his wife was the woman from the beginning who killed herself because of the hate mail. So after that, John leaves the man's house, sadly, of course. he didn't want that to happen to that man or his wife. And this is all in that letter to Marge. So Marge sent him a letter that was basically like, hey, this is great up here. We're fucking and we're drinking and we're doing psychedelics and it's awesome. You got to come up here. And his letter is like, yeah, I haven't found your daughter yet. Also, this man killed himself and it was horrible. So just two completely different tones of letters. And he finishes the letter by telling her that he does have a lead on something that might help. He has recently read an article about ley lines and another article about bizarre suicides and defense contractors. And it just so happens that the man who wrote both of these articles is staying in the room next to Constantine in his hotel. So he tells Marge that he's going to go ask that guy questions about what he knows and about the information that he gathered while writing those articles. And he signs the letter off by saying, "It's all starting to come together, Marge. Don't worry, we'll soon have her back. She'll be all right. She's a tough kid. Take it easy. Love, John." And then we cut to Mercury, who is writing in a diary to herself because she obviously can't send letters to people because she's captured by Geotronics and being held against her will. But she is writing it like as if she was writing a letter to someone. So she's talking about how Dr. Fulton is doing tests on her, specifically with like mind reading and guessing cards that he's looking at and whatnot. And she also says that he stares at her a lot and watches her and how creepy he is and how basically he's got some kind of weird infatuation with her and that it really grosses her out to think about it. And then we cut to Dr. Fulton, who's talking to his boss as they watch Mercury write in her diary. And Fulton's explaining to his boss that Mercury is so powerful that she's kind of opened up this whole new world and new side of complexity to this whole fear machine weapon that they're making. He says, "She's given us clues to complexities in the geotechnical web we barely conceived of. I think we're on the verge of discovering a whole new branch of physics." But his boss doesn't really care about that. His boss is more concerned with these articles on ley lines and the bizarre suicides that have been happening. And he yells at Dr. Fulton saying, "But are we on the verge of giving our overseers what they want? We're in hot water. Geotronics is attracting far too much attention. That train business was a bloody disaster. I called to London for consultations next week. I'm going to try for funding to move this setup somewhere isolated where we can do the job properly. Scotland, perhaps." And then we cut back to Mercury, who is writing in her journal still, but she's writing about these new tests that they've been subjecting her to, where she is now in the center of that fake Stonehenge power circle from the last issue that Corporal Morgan used to derail the train and attack it with fear. And from her writings, we find that there are actually two of these power circles. One that she can use to remove fear from people, and then the other circle is to trap that fear and hold it like as a reservoir until they're ready to unleash it in an attack on someone or somewhere. She also describes where they get this fear from. Apparently, there's a building close by that is probably like a psychiatric ward or something, and Geotronics has been getting Mercury to use this power circle to remove the fear from those patients, at least temporarily. Mercury says she really likes this part of the job. She didn't know she could do it, but basically Dr. Fulton has taught her how to remove fear from subjects, and she is happy that she can do that and give some relief to these people. So what she does is she removes the fear from these patients, and then she puts it into the fear machine holding tank. And she ends her journal entry by saying, "Sometimes when I throw the terrors in the trap, I get a glimpse of something growing in there. That's when I get scared. Perhaps it's my terror. People have all different terrors, but right now, I'm too tired to tell you anymore. Good night." And then we cut to John, who is at the hotel. He is waiting outside the door of his neighbor, and he's been hearing noises in there, and he's looking through the keyhole, kind of seeing people walk back and forth, and he's kind of like, "Come on, people, hurry up. I need to get in there to talk to this guy before the night's over." So he sees the people wrapping up and about to leave, so he waits till they walk down the hallway and out of sight, and then he knocks on the door, and he says, "Funny, there's a noise but no answer." And it just so happens the door's unlocked, so he kind of opens the door and says, "Hello?" And as he walks in, he's like, There's definitely a noise. But he's thinking it's like the guy's having sex or something like that, or he's in the bathroom or something. But as he turns the lights on, he realizes there's no one in the bed, there's no one in the restroom, and the noise is coming from the closet. So Constantine opens the door, and as he does, he finds a man hanging upside down by his thighs, and he's like bound with his hands behind him, and his feet are bound to his hands as well. So his like back is super arched and like in a very, very uncomfortable position. And the rope that is binding his hands and feet is also wrapped around his neck, and he has a plastic bag over his head as well. So basically, the men that were in there were sent to kill him and to make it look like some sort of freak sex accident is what I'm assuming. Because John says earlier that he's gay, so I could see whoever these nefarious corporation people or possibly government officials are putting him in that position so that the police would just think he died of some weird kinky sex thing and just write it off as a suicide or accidental death. And that is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.